For this beginner painting, we're going to use a mask to help get the basic shapes in place. So I use Cricut cutouts, and you will receive the pattern or the cutouts if you are coming to a class, and you're going to place them on your piece of canvas. Now these are designed so that they can be removed and replaced. You don't want to get too close to the edges because the canvas is cut slightly larger than ATC size. I'm going to reposition them and use a paper cutout to check to make sure that this is right for an ATC.
Yeah.
Next, I'm going to tape that piece of canvas to a bit of cardboard, and I'm going to mix my paint. This is 1 part black, 3 parts blue, and I'm going to paint the background. The Cricut shapes are there to give us the basic shape of our final painting and to mask the area so that we don't have dark blue on all of the canvas. We want this layer to be very, very smooth, and you'll find that actually photographing things really makes the bumps show up. So mostly I'm going to get all the paint in place, lots of back and forth. You want this layer to be very, very smooth, and if you really want your ATC to be of a better quality, you want to do 2 layers. So the first layer I'm going to put with strokes from top to bottom. Looks like side to side on the video, but top to bottom in the final card. And I want to get every ridge out of this that I can. Then I'm going to let this layer dry 100% and put a second layer going in the opposite direction. So the first layer is completely dry. I'm coming in and putting a second layer. Again, smooth as I can make it without any bumps or ridges showing, and going in the perpendicular direction to the first coat. It's not absolutely necessary to do this, but you will get a better product if you've got 2 thin layers. It's easier to get things smooth, and it just looks nicer all in all. It's worth the extra time, but sometimes you don't want to take that extra time because you're ready to really get going with the painting. Again, we've let this dry completely. Step 3 is to use a hobby knife and remove that mask, which was made of Cricut vinyl. It's a little bit tricky, especially if you're trying to photograph it, but you can also use your fingernails if you don't have a craft knife. And then notice that the edges are not perfect. You've got a little bit of area where a bit of the paint has bled underneath the Cricut shape. This is really not a problem in this particular painting. If you had a painting where you needed something with a very, very crisp edge, what you would need to do is paint a layer of white paint on your canvas first and let it dry, possibly even 2. The more layers of smooth acrylic that you have, the crisper your edges can be. But for this owl, he's got feathers. It doesn't matter one bit if these edges aren't crisp. Next, you want to look for the middle size circle from the Cricut cutouts and place them for the eye area. Now I like mine a bit overlap. This is a matter of taste. You can put them farther apart if you want to. Once they're in place, we're going to paint a thin layer of yellow ochre. So this is yellow ochre straight from the tube. And this is one of those times where it doesn't really matter how perfect you get this, but the key thing is to make the layer very thin and to avoid any ridges or bumps. Now notice I just made a little mistake there that in the real world it wouldn't matter a bit, but because this is an instructional video, I'm going to show you how easy it is to simply use a slightly damp Q-tip, brush it inward from the dry area toward the wet area, and you can easily correct that kind of mistake. Now, that mistake in this particular project really doesn't matter at all. It's going to be covered, you'll see later, with some feathers, but it's just a good technique to know. Also notice the way I'm holding the brush to kind of edge up towards that area, sort of pushing toward the boundary area. This is a handy technique to know for times when you need a nice crisp edge. Notice that that edge of the paint at the top has a bit of a ridge. There are times in a painting when you want that to really help define an edge. In this particular painting, that ridge is not going to be something we want, and I should go back and tidy it up a bit. You don't want ridges because we're going to be putting feathers sort of overlapping that area. The mask was just to get us a basic shape. It's not meant to be a precision type painting. That's not how this painting was designed. While that yellow ochre layer dries, you might want to take a few minutes and practice the next part. This is actually a decorative painting style stroke. I am not very good at it, but it's a fun thing to try, and it really works well with this particular project. So on another piece of scrap canvas, you want to take yellow ochre and white, and notice you don't want them mixed up solid. You want them to have kind of stripy areas, and you're going to practice making little strokes with your paintbrush. And you want to apply this, I'm hoping you'll want to apply this nice and thick. Notice how you've got an actual texture here. So practice those strokes until you feel fairly comfortable with them. When it's time to actually apply the feathers, you'll be putting them right next to each other in rows, where the first row goes on one way and the second row is staggered, sort of like brickwork. Now, another thing that's important here is the brush that you're using. I thought that maybe this tiny brush that I have lots of them would work well, but I found that that wasn't really working for me. So experiment with brushes until you find the kind of brush that's going to work best for you. When you're ready, you want to work from the bottom of the owl upward and take those tiny little strokes. You're going to find that I didn't do a real good job with this particular paintbrush. It's not really working out the way I want. So I'm going to go ahead and speed things up a little bit and show you just how fast and easy it is to start over. As long as that bottom layer is 100% dry, anything that I put on this layer is going to easily be able to be erased, as you'll see. That layer is just not working. I'm not happy with those feathers. I'm not happy with that paintbrush. So I'm going to show you just how easy it is to get rid of this. As long as that bottom layer is dry, I've got a wet cotton bud, and I'm just scraping across the canvas and removing it with the wet side, then picking up some of the extra paint with the dry side, and then taking a cloth in the end and wiping it right off, and it's fresh and ready to take another try. So I've got a better brush, and I'm trying again. Remember that you put a row in, and the second row you want to sort of stagger that row, kind of like brickwork. It also helps to maybe make one row darker color and the next row try to get it a little bit lighter. You'll get a little bit better contrast in those rows. Again, decorative painting strokes are not my strong suit, but it's something that adds a lot of texture and mostly adds a lot of fun to a beginner painting. Once we get up near where the beak is going to be, we don't want big, thick ridges. So smooth out a little bit of the area where a beak is going to be. And then do the tail feathers and smooth out the area where we're going to be putting a branch. And you might want to go back and tidy up some of those feathers right on top of the branch. Use the same concept to put feathers all around the head. I like to get them nice and thick because I like texture. If texture is not your thing, don't go quite that thick. I also like to put two kind of ear tufts coming out. Once the feathers are dry, you're going to use that same method using yellow ochre and brown to paint in wing feathers. While we've got that brown paint out, we're going to add a branch. The main thing with this is to be careful that you don't leave big ridges in the area of the feet. Now for the rest of the branch, it's fine to have some ridges. It might help it to stand out, but we're going to be painting some owl's feet, and we want to make sure that we don't have an area with a big ridge right where the feet are supposed to be. We also might want to add a little bit of yellow ochre along the top of the branch so it stands out a little bit more against that dark blue. And again, be sure to smooth out the area where you're going to be putting the feet. Make sure that you don't have ridges going the wrong way. Once this brown layer is dry, you're going to use a craft knife and remove those circles. Now, when you have very thick paint like those feathers, sometimes when you try to peel this off, you're going to accidentally peel some of the paint off. So a good habit when you know you've got thick paint is to use the craft knife and cut along the circle before you try to lift. What you don't want to do is lift up that circle and take all the paint along with it. So trim along the edges where it's thick and carefully remove that circle. Again, be careful not to poke through your canvas. And you might need to do a little bit of tidying up with your craft knife. Now we're going to add two more small circles. The position of these circles is a matter of taste. They don't need to be right in the very center. Think of the circles as being the colored portion of the owl's eye and the white portion as being the feathers that are going to surround the owl's eyes. So I like mine a little bit off center. Then I'm going to get some very thick white paint and paint feathers around the eyes. I might want to add in just a bit of gray shading. Again, this is a matter of opinion. And you want to use that same method of getting a nice, thick, textured feather. And you may have noticed as we've been working that sometimes when we take off that vinyl, that mask, it leaves quite a bit of a ridge behind. So for these owl feathers, we want those eyes to not necessarily have a ridge from the white. So once we've got all of that white in, we're going to smooth it out in the area of the vinyl so that we don't have a big old ridge where we don't want it. As long as we've got the white paint out, we want to paint the moon, which I've got off center here. We'll show it better in the next clip. You can either make the moon very smooth and white, maybe using several layers, or I like a lot of texture, so I'm going to put a lot of texture into my moon, getting it nice and thick and controlling those ridges. Next, we want to remove those plastic circles, those vinyl circles, and we're simply going to fill in the eye slots with yellow ochre paint. Mix a little bit of gray paint using white and black and paint in the beak and the feet. Now this video is getting a little bit long, and by this point I didn't do a very good job of them. You might want to practice these first like we practiced the other strokes. The beak would look really nice if you could get a really good single decorative painting stroke, and the feet would look nice if you could get each of those toes as a really well done decorative painting style stroke. Once the yellow ochre eyes are completely dry, you're going to apply a black circle over the top. Allow that to dry and then add little white highlights.